Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Simon Wing, and I'm working with Waterline Resources in Nanaimo. The SCRD has asked Waterline to provide you guys a quick presentation on groundwater resources on the Sunshine Coast and kind of give context to the current groundwater situation, what we know, and what we don't know, actually, and how the work being done currently is helping move along, the search for groundwater.
So before getting into describing what is an aquifer and what is groundwater and how it all got there, I wanted to give a quick history on how the SRD has been completing their investigation for groundwater and how the provincial government also has been working indirectly on the same initiatives. So starting in the top left here, we can see that in 2007, the SARD became aware, or at least started to consider groundwater as a potential viable long-term water supply to help subsidize water, use within the Chapman Creek water system. And those discussions kind of continued until 2016 when a phase one investigation was completed. And the phase one investigation really is the first time that specific locations were evaluated based on the economics and potential water yield and viability to help go into planning. What locations should be targeted first. And as you can see here in 2018 and 19 and now ongoing in 2020, several and locations have been drilled and tested, and the results, show some promising locations for groundwater extraction. So how does the province come into play? Well, the province has also been doing their own work since the 60s to map groundwater, monitor groundwater levels and chemistry. And all this work has been compiled in a pretty extensive database called GWells. And the database is updated regularly, and a lot of this work was used in helping distinguish, drilling locations. Also of note is that in 2016, the Water Sustainability Act was approved, and this is really the first time, or is the first time in the province that groundwater was legislated. The act provides, different regulations and requirements that potential groundwater suppliers and groundwater users need to abide by, and really is the foundation for groundwater as a feasible and reliable source. So now that we have an idea on how the SRD has been pursuing groundwater as a viable resource, we kind of now got to get into how aquifers and the groundwater system is understood. And there's different ways to kind of get an idea of this before actually doing any field activities. Two of the main ways this is accomplished is through review of surficial geology, so the distributions of sediments and rocks at surface. And this mapping has been completed over time by various different agencies, but typically people have been walking across the area and kind of mapping the different sediments they see at or near surface. Another way is reviewing and looking at the surface water systems. So, the different watershed areas, the different creek sizes, streams, and how those have affected or redistributed those superficial sediments. But again, ultimately, how we actually get an idea of the extent of groundwater is by physically drilling holes and testing aquifer zones, which is being done currently. So someone would be on site with a drill rig. Excuse me. They would drill a hole. Once they get that hole drilled and they found a useful location, they'd put a pump down the well and get a testing results back from the pumping response. And those pumping response typically provide context to hydraulic properties such as storage, conductivity, transmissivity, and those get factored into if this aquifer can be used as a long-term supply of groundwater. So we need to also now understand how these aquifers got here in the first place. And to do so, we need to kind of understand the geology, and more importantly, the depositional environment, as we like to call it, on how this material that makes up these aquifers got here in the first place.
So on the top here, you can see that we have two different types of depositional environments. We have glacial depositional environments, which is sediments that are deposited during the movement of glacial ice. And these deposits can be things such as silts, sands, gravels, clays. And we also have fluvial depositional environment, which deposits the same kind of material but in a different fashion. So as rivers and streams and creeks move from higher elevation to lower elevation, they deposit these sediments in different orientations and different distributions. And all of this sedimentary, or all this these superficial sediments, are deposited on top of bedrock. And bedrock can be different types of rock itself. In this area on the Sunshine Coast, we have metamorphic type rocks, we have igneous type rocks, and we also have sedimentary rocks too, which are typically sandstones, shales, conglomerates, and that nature. And the big distinguishing thing here is that bedrock was there first. Bedrock was much, much older than these superficial sediments. And typically the sequence of events here is we have these superficial sediments on top of bedrock. So now that we have an idea of the different types of sediments and the different types of rocks that are present on the Sunshine Coast, we can quickly get into the different types of aquifers. So if you focus here on the right on the schematic, you can see that within the bedrock, where the bedrock is fractured, these fractures can store water. And the water that's stored in these fractures, if and when connected, can create bedrock aquifers. On top of bedrock, where the glaciers and rivers, the fluvial processes have left behind sands and gravels, we can get different types of aquifers, such as confined aquifers, which are confined by zones of more or less permeable material, such as silts and clays. And we can also get unconfined aquifers, which are above and more connected with surface. So now, taking that all into consideration, the depositional environment and the different aquifer types, I just wanted to show a quick example of what this all looks like in real life in the Somes area along Church Road there, where the SCRD is currently drilling a new production well. And so what's been mapped there based on drilling data and testing data is three main units, or four if you count bedrock. You have the Capilano sediments, the Vashon Drift, and the pre-Vashon. The pre-Vashon is the main water-bearing zone. It's mainly sands and gravels from a fluvial environment, and it's considered a confined aquifer, as it's bounded on top by lower permeable till from the Vashon, and again more lower permeable silts and clays from the Capilano. There is one unconfined aquifer in the Capilano. It's not necessarily regionally extensive, and that is in the sands and gravels near surface. So going a little further, what do the sediments look like? Here I just have a few pictures from some drilling work that's been completed in the Somes area near the town of Gibsons. Here we can see the distribution of coarser grain, more permeable material that makes up the pre-Vashon confined aquifer. Above that, we can see the lower permeable, finer grain material of the Vashon, which is predominantly an aquitard, so a covering unit or confining unit. And then in the Capilano, I only have a picture here of the more finer grain material, but we get a sense again of what the aquitard looks like, and kind of the sequence of material. So with our understanding of the deposition of superficial sediments and bedrock and how these aquifers are distributed, we can now get into how that water gets in there. And the water cycle, although quite well-known concept, is one of the main driving factors in understanding groundwater and understanding if it's a viable source.
So as you can expect, precipitation at higher elevations, such as rainfall and snowfall, you know, enters the ground along its travel back to the ocean. Some of it gets into the bedrock, into the fractures. Other parts of the water get into the confined and unconfined portions of the aquifer, and some of it obviously gets stays as overland flow and enters lakes and streams. But for us as hydrogeologists and others, understanding that plumbing system is really important. So continuing the water cycle, I have again another pretty basic schematic here showing, how rainfall or precipitation enters the system and makes its way into groundwater as storage. I've associated a few names here, so as you can expect, some of the direct runoff in creeks and streams, such as Chapman, Chasser, Gibsons, Langdale Creek, how that water is stored in the ground in the superficial sediments or bedrock. Again, here that lends itself to the different aquifer names and different aquifer types. So I've included here Aquifer 555, which is a bedrock aquifer, kind of a regional aquifer across most of the Sunshine Coast. And then again, I just included a smaller named aquifer here, Aquifer 552, which is kind of a smaller aquifer, superficial aquifer located near Langdale. So to understand groundwater, we also need to do testing, as I've indicated, along with drilling and understanding where these sediments are occurring. Two ways we go about understanding groundwater is by monitoring how groundwater levels fluctuate. And in the middle here, I've shown what's called a hydrograph, and the hydrograph here shows the water levels over time and how they fluctuate with the seasons. Giving us a sense of water in the system and water out. Some aquifers, such as this upper blue line here, is an unconfined aquifer and varies quite a bit with the seasons. As you can tell, it's lower in the summer when there's less water in the system, and higher in the winters when there's more water coming in from precipitation. This kind of green line here, kind of a less fluctuating line, is more of a confined aquifer from that pre-Vashon, and it shows kind of a continuous trend that is less affected by seasons. And also, we also need to test the chemistry. So on top of testing or monitoring the levels, we need to monitor the chemistry. And the chemistry also gives us a good sense of the different water types. Is it connected to surface water? Is it connected to seawater? Is it fresh? Is it impacted? And we can do that by sampling. So on a year scale or semi-annually, samples can be collected from the groundwater and analyzed for the different parameters. Some parameters you might be familiar with are things like turbidity, things such as iron and magnesium, and also bacteria too is a big indicator parameter for different sources and how they're connected. Again, a quick example here, kind of a real-life example of how monitoring is being conducted on the Sunshine Coast. I've pulled the provincial observation well 460 located near Gibsons or in Gibsons. Here you can see how the water level fluctuates seasonally with precipitation patterns, and also how the water level is fluctuating over time. Something interesting to note here is that the water level in this aquifer has been increasing over time. That could be attributed to a lot of different things, less consumption or more precipitation. But having this data is really important to understanding aquifers over the long term and how they can be useful as a viable source. So to continue on with the monitoring of groundwater, here I'm just wanted to show some results of groundwater chemistry. This is from Aquifer 560, which is located near Gibsons, and I just wanted to give you guys a sense of the different age and temperature of the water. These numbers, could be meaningful or kind of meaningful in the sense that it's providing us an idea of how long it's taking for the water to enter the system from the recharge zones. You can see that in the pre-Vashon, which is Aquifer 560, the variation in aquifer age is between 8 years old to 86. So quite young, even though 86 years old is quite old. This is quite young for water and for in geological time. In the Capilano, which is also can be an unconfined aquifer, the water, although we only have one data point, is been recorded as 2 years old. So you can kind of get a sense that the water closer to surface is younger, the water deeper down is a little older, but generally speaking, this information is quite useful for kind of getting a sense of how long the water is there, how long does it take to get into the system, and really how much water is available for use in the future. So now taking everything into consideration, what we've seen from the preliminary mapping to understanding the drilling, testing, monitoring chemistry, monitoring water levels, how all that was even deposited in the first place. Kind of get a sense of now how the Sunshine Coast specifically is going about looking for locations that are viable groundwater sources. I know the Sunshine Coast area encompasses quite a long area, and I've kind of included some numbers here to give context. But right now the province is continuously updating their mapping based on this new data that's coming in, and obviously the SCRD is updating their mapping of the area as well, and we can kind of identify 6 major superficial aquifers and 6 major bedrock aquifers. Superficial aquifers, like I've mentioned, are the main target. They typically have quite a good chemistry. They're quite accessible, and are a bit more abundant in storing water. The bedrock aquifers are more challenging to target, given that the water's stored in fractures, and typically the groundwater chemistry in bedrock aquifers is a little poor, is worse, or the adjective is poor. It tends to have higher concentrations in metals, and again is harder to access. So now we've come almost full circle here, and we've kind of described groundwater and aquifers. And so we now might be asking ourselves, why groundwater versus surface water? Why move to groundwater? Why explore groundwater? As we know, surface water is the main source for the Chapman Creek water system, which is supplying groundwater to most of the regional district. But the main takeaways on why groundwater is important is that it is potentially a more sustainable and reliable source. As we know, surface water is vulnerable to summer or winter droughts, and a lot of that water, surface water, is accumulated or is falls or is available during the winter when we have high precipitation, and it's typically not available in the summer as it moves through the system, through the plumbing system, quite quickly. Whereas we've seen with the previous slides that groundwater recharge or that groundwater age is much older, and so therefore implied that groundwater is entering the system slower and is being stored over time. And these storage zones, these aquifers, are in some sense an easier way to access the water. But regardless of the source, both groundwater and surface water aren't immune to climate change. I think it's important to take away that although groundwater has advantages in buffering seasonal changes, both are affected, or at least groundwater is also affected by long-term climate effect. I think it's important to take away too that to manage groundwater is properly, you need to manage it as with surface water as well. We know that both are connected. So water management specifically for groundwater, some thoughts. Again, we know that groundwater, surface water are connected in some form or another, and monitoring is really important to understand this connection.
We also need to understand how much water is getting in the system, although this is challenging given the complexity of the geology and the topography. Having some sense of water in and water out is really important for planning. And also, understanding changes to the land use. So as we develop new areas, more buildings, more roads, more streets, and less green area potentially, how is that land change affecting how water is entering the system, and again, how surface water is being directed. Things that can help us with this from a legislative perspective are the WSA, or the Water Sustainability Act. As we mentioned in one of the first slides, it came into effect, or the more recent version came into effect in 2016. And this really helps municipalities such as the SCRD and others design or decide on what is beneficial use, preferential use, and really gives the guidelines for the requirements for assessment. And I mean, this is helpful for everyone from small users to big users, as it kind of levels the playing field and keeps everyone in with the same goal in mind of protecting the water resource. So water management isn't without its challenges, and ultimately a lot of care and consideration needs to be taken to make sure that all the requirements and regulations are being followed. There are a lot of considerations with drilling locations and exploration. Where is there a reasonable space to complete these exercises? Currently, the SCRD is investing a lot of time and effort into ensuring that there are no negative impacts to local domestic users and other municipalities. They're also assessing how the water withdrawal from the aquifer can or would affect fish species. And, this work is challenging, but has the benefit of making sure that water is properly regulated or properly managed, that everyone has a piece of the pie when it comes to water licensing and water use. So thanks again for listening in over the last 20 minutes. Hopefully there's some valuable information there that you can take away while groundwater exploration on the Sunshine Coast continues. Have a great day.